Bus stop 18 was slick under the drizzle. Pedestrians ignored the frail woman huddled against the cold concrete. Daniel Cole, a 38-year-old single dad, approached, shielding his daughter Lily with an umbrella. "Daddy, why doesn't she have a raincoat?" Lily whispered. Daniel offered his spare raincoat and a fresh sandwich. "You need this," he said gently. The woman flinched. Daniel gave a kind, quiet nod and walked away. She watched him leave. Suddenly, the entire bus stop froze. 4 huge bodyguards in black suits emerged from tinted SUVs. A sharp lawyer demanded, his voice ringing out, "Who is Daniel Cole? Our client requires his immediate presence." Daniel Cole lived a life measured in honesty and small kindnesses. He was a simple, dedicated repairman. His shop, Cole's Electrical Fixes, was small and often greasy, but he ran it with meticulous integrity. His income was modest, certainly nothing lavish, but his purpose was crystal clear. Raising Lily. He wanted to teach his daughter to be a fundamentally good person. His greatest aspiration was her happiness, and his curriculum was simple. Never walk past someone in need. Every morning, their route to Lily's school passed the same bus stop. And every morning, Daniel saw the same woman. She was thin, drawn, and carried an aura of deep-seated fear. She was always trembling, even when the sun was out. She never made eye contact. She seemed to be trying to shrink, to become entirely invisible. Other commuters either ignored her entirely or gave her a wide berth, their expressions a mix of judgment and discomfort. To them, she was simply an inconvenience. Daniel started leaving small tokens. A fresh, soft roll, always the one with the oats and seeds. A bottle of warm water in the winter, carefully sealed. He would discreetly place an umbrella next to her if the forecast called for rain. He never waited for a thank you. He offered the gift and walked away, giving her the dignity of taking it without feeling indebted. Over time, this became a silent ritual, a language built entirely on mutual respect and distance. He would tap the bread bag twice, and she would slowly reach out after he was a few steps away. Lily, however, was fascinated. She possessed the innocent, fearless curiosity of a child. She had invented a name for the quiet woman in the corner. "Look, Daddy, it's Miss Angel," she'd whisper, clutching Daniel's hand tightly. The woman, the soon-to-be-known Elise, would always refuse more than she needed. Her voice was always small, strained. "I don't dare take much. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve kindness." Her words were laced with self-loathing that deeply troubled Daniel. He wondered what kind of person, what kind of life, could strip someone of their belief in their own basic worth. Daniel's reply never changed. It was his mantra, repeated softly like a prayer. No one needs to deserve kindness to receive it. He noticed her behavior was different from other people he occasionally helped. She never asked for money. She never extended her hand. She only accepted what was directly offered. Her thanks was always a profound, mournful look from deep, sad eyes. It was a look that felt heavy, like carrying a history too large for her frail body. One humid afternoon, Daniel slipped on the wet curb while rushing to shield Lily from a sudden downpour. He lost his footing. Before he could hit the ground, Elise was there. She lunged forward, catching his arm. Her hands were surprisingly weak, yet she held on to him with all her might. Straining until her knuckles were white, the sheer terror of his fall seemed to override her own perpetual fear. Daniel regained his balance, his heart pounding. He looked at her shocked. "Are you all right?" he asked, seeing the pain flicker in her face. She wasn't just checking on him. She looked like she had intentionally absorbed the impact. She only nodded, her expression conveying a painful familiarity with being hurt. "Daddy," Lily observed later that week, her brow furrowed in child logic. "How come Miss Angel never finishes the bread you give her?" Daniel watched the woman from a distance. Elise was meticulously breaking the bread into tiny pieces and sharing them with a flock of hungry pigeons and stray cats. He smiled softly. "Because, sweetie," he said, pulling Lily close, "some grown-ups have been hurt so badly, they forget how to keep goodness just for themselves. They share what little they have." As the weeks passed, Daniel observed more. She never spoke on the phone. She never seemed to talk to anyone. She had no belongings except the ragged coat she always wore. Her isolation was absolute. She wasn't homeless in the traditional sense. She was a ghost, hiding in plain sight. One morning when he handed her a cup of coffee, he saw it, a deep purple bruise encircling her delicate wrist, disappearing under the sleeve of her coat. His gentle expression hardened instantly. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low in concern. She froze. She violently shook her head, pulling her sleeve down, avoiding his gaze. She clutched her coat tighter, her fear palpable. Daniel didn't press. He understood instinctively that pushing her would only make her retreat further. He couldn't risk making her afraid of him, too. He simply stood there, a silent guardian. Finally, just before Daniel had to leave, she spoke. Her words were barely audible, yet they sliced through the morning silence and struck Daniel cold. Her eyes were full of a desperate, long-held pain. "You are the first person to treat me like a human being in years." The relationship remained the same for a while, a quiet, transactional kindness that spoke volumes. Then one late evening, Daniel was passing the bus stop after an emergency late-night repair job. Lily had stayed with a neighbor. The sun had fully set, and the streetlights cast long, yellow shadows. The woman was still there, utterly exposed. She was sitting on the bench, completely drenched. Her flimsy, torn umbrella had inverted and broken in the harsh evening wind. Her body trembled with exhaustion, not just cold. Daniel rushed forward and shielded her with his own sturdy jacket. "You don't have shelter?" he asked, his tone worried. She trembled violently, her head bowed. I didn't dare go back to the place I was staying. It's too close." "Too close to what, Elise?" Daniel asked, using her name for the first time. "Who made you this scared?" She bit her lip until it was white. Her voice was a bare whisper, heavy with shame and resentment. She finally lifted her eyes, and the pain in them was unbearable. "People I once trusted, absolutely. People who use their power to make me feel small." Just then, two young men approached the bus stop, reeking of cheap alcohol and entitlement. They spotted Elise. They immediately started taunting her, their voices loud and cruel. "Hey, look! It's the crazy beggar lady! Didn't you get enough free stuff yet? She's out here fishing for pity again. Pathetic! Go home, tramp!" Daniel's blood boiled, but he kept his face calm. He stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Elise and the bullies. "She isn't bothering anyone. Leave her alone," he commanded, his tone low but firm. One of the men, taller and broader than Daniel, laughed dismissively. He shoved Daniel roughly on the shoulder. "Get out of the way, little maintenance worker. This doesn't concern you. Or are you trying to score points with the madwoman?" Daniel gripped his toolbox handle, his knuckles white. The impulse to fight, to defend himself and Elise, was overwhelming. But he immediately thought of Lily and the values he taught her. Violence wasn't the answer. He held his ground without raising his hands. "I don't want to cause a scene. I don't want people to see something ugly," he simply stated. "Walk away now." His refusal to fight back, his absolute calm in the face of aggression, seemed to rob the bullies of their power. They wanted a reaction, a struggle. They got quiet, dignified resolve. With a final, crude insult directed at Daniel's worn work clothes, the two men spat on the ground and swaggered off into the darkness. Elise released a shaky breath. She gripped Daniel's sleeve with surprising strength, her whole body shaking violently. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I apologize for letting you get into trouble because of me. They shouldn't have touched you." Daniel placed his hand softly, reassuringly, on her shoulder. His touch was warm and non-threatening. "They were bullying you, Elise. That is not your fault. Their anger is their own sickness, not yours." He knew she couldn't stay out in the rain. He took her to a nearby 24-hour convenience store. He bought her a clean towel, a new plastic comb, and a warm carton of soup. They sat awkwardly at a small plastic table in the corner. Finally, after several deep, shaky breaths, the quiet, broken woman broke her long silence. "My name is Elise," she repeated, this time with a different, firmer quality. She looked directly at him, a moment of profound courage. Daniel just nodded, his gaze patient. "It's a beautiful name, Elise." Elise began to breathe in short, ragged gasps. She had to force the words out. "I used to be the wife of a very rich, very powerful man. His name is Maxwell Thorne. He is incredibly successful and incredibly cruel. He had me completely isolated, controlled, and watched. He used his wealth not just to protect me, but to imprison me. Imprisoned? Daniel asked, leaning in. Mentally, socially. Every phone call, every meeting, every expense was logged. I was allowed no friends, only associates he approved of. He convinced me that I was fragile and incapable of managing simple things, like a bank account or ordering food. He stripped me of my competence, one day at a time. She choked on the memory. Then I found out the truth. He was systematically abusing his company's lower-level employees, exploiting undocumented workers for massive profit. When I finally found the courage to oppose him, when I threatened to expose him, he turned the full force of his legal machine on me. He threw me out of the house. He made sure I left with absolutely nothing but the clothes on my back. He destroyed all my credit, all my contacts, and spread rumors that I was mentally unstable. Daniel stared at her, stunned by the sheer malice. You've been living on the street, fleeing him? Elise nodded slowly, tears welling up and spilling down her pale cheeks. For 3 months now. He owns everything. The hardest part wasn't the cold. It was the feeling that he was right, that I was worthless, that no one would ever believe me, that I had lost the ability to live. I just needed someone, anyone, to tell me I wasn't worthless. I just needed to know I was still human. Lily stirred in Daniel's arms. Sensing the distress, she opened her eyes. She reached out a small, perfect hand and gently placed it on Elise's trembling arm. "Miss Angel," Lily said sweetly, "you are not worthless. You have wings." Elise's control finally snapped. She put her head in her hands and began to cry aloud, the first release of emotion she'd allowed in months. Daniel simply moved the table closer and sat with her, silently. When she finally calmed down, she looked Daniel directly in the eyes. Her expression was urgent, desperate. It was a terrifying final warning, driven by a fear that still dictated her every move. "If I disappear one day, Daniel," Elise whispered, her voice raw, "please don't look for me. I don't want anyone, especially Lily, to be in danger because of me. He is a dangerous man." The next morning, Daniel felt a wave of cold dread wash over him. He and Lily arrived at the bus stop. Elise was gone. No note, no umbrella, no trace. Only the flattened spot on the concrete where she always sat. Lily looked around frantically. Her eyes were wide and worried. "Daddy, where is Miss Angel? She promised she would be here. Did the mean men take her?" Daniel looked up and down the street. He tried to rationalize. Maybe she had found a shelter. Maybe she was finally safe. But the memory of the bruise on her wrist, her terrified plea, and her talk of a dangerous ex-husband kept him on edge. He wanted to call the police, but her explicit request, "Don't look for me," paralyzed him. The quiet anxiety lasted only a moment. Suddenly, 3 imposing black SUVs, identical and intimidating, sped down the street and stopped with a controlled screech right in front of the bus stop. The doors flew open. 4 towering bodyguards, sharp and cold in their black suits and earpieces, exited the vehicles, moving with practiced military precision. A senior-looking lawyer, immaculate in a bespoke gray suit, detached himself from the group. He held a thick file, scanning the few pedestrians present. His voice was precise, authoritative, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Are you Daniel Cole?" Daniel quickly shielded Lily behind him, his protective instinct flaring. "Who's asking? What is this about?" The lawyer executed a brief, almost imperceptible nod of respect. "Our client requires your immediate escort, Mr. Cole. This is a matter of corporate security and personal urgency." Daniel was stunned. "What client? I don't have a client." One of the bodyguards silently opened the rear door of the central SUV. Daniel's breath hitched. He forgot to breathe. Elise was sitting inside. She was wearing a new, clean, sophisticated wool coat. Cashmere, Daniel instinctively realized, from its luxurious drape. Her hair was perfectly brushed, her face washed clean of street grime. She still looked terribly sad and exhausted, but the dirt, the fear, and the invisibility were gone. She looked like a woman who commanded respect, a woman who belonged in the back of a luxury SUV, not a bus stop. Elise looked at him, her eyes filled with apology and deep fatigue. Her voice was weak, heavy with unshed tears. I am so sorry, Daniel. I hid the truth from you. I'm not just the ex-wife of a rich man. I fled a lot more than just my husband. The lawyer cut in, delivering the ultimate bombshell with dry, emotionless professionalism. Mr. Cole, allow me to introduce Ms. Elise Sterling. She is the missing sole heiress of the Sterling Group, a multi-billion-dollar global corporation. Her disappearance 3 months ago triggered a massive internal search. We have been searching for her across 7 different states since she failed to show up for her official asset transfer. Daniel stood motionless, the entire world shifting on its axis. The simple repairman was face to face with the missing daughter of a global financial dynasty. The depth of her isolation, the absolute horror of her 3 months on the street, suddenly took on terrifying new dimensions. She wasn't just broke. She was fleeing one of the world's most aggressive manhunts. Elise looked down at her hands, her voice barely a whisper. I ran away because I was being controlled by everyone. My father, my ex-husband, their lawyers. They treated me like a pawn, an asset to be managed. I couldn't stand the suffocation anymore. I chose the street over their gilded cage. Lily, however, saw none of the darkness. She was only joyous. She clapped her hands together. I knew it. I knew Miss Angel had magic powers. She got a new car and new clothes. Elise let out a small, tearful laugh, the first true sound of joy Daniel had ever heard from her. The lawyer presented the file again, his face a mask of confusion. Ms. Sterling has made a specific, highly unusual request. She demanded that you, Daniel Cole, accompany her immediately back to the estate. We are operating under extreme stress, Mr. Cole. Please comply. Daniel's mind spun. Me? Why me? I'm just a repairman. Elise looked up, her gaze steady, sincere, and desperate. You are the only person who treated me like a person, not an asset, not a commodity. You treated me like I mattered. The bodyguards respectfully opened the door further, ushering Lily and Daniel into the luxurious, climate-controlled space. The journey ended not at an ordinary house, but at a massive, sprawling fortress, the Sterling family estate. Outside, a riot of reporters, camera crews, and news vans were waiting, creating a media circus of blinding flashes and shouted questions. As they stepped out of the tinted vehicle, Elise instinctively grabbed Daniel's hand. Her grip was tight, desperate, a silent promise of the trust she was placing in him. Don't leave me, Daniel, she pleaded. I'm terrified of them, of all of this. Daniel kept his expression neutral, projecting a quiet strength he didn't entirely feel. He gently squeezed her hand back. I'm right here, Elise. Take a breath. Inside the opulent marble foyer, Elise's father, Mr. Sterling, a cold, imposing, elderly billionaire, was waiting, flanked by his own security team. He looked Daniel up and down, taking in his simple jacket and worn jeans, his expression radiating absolute scorn. This is the man who brought you back, Elise? A common, small-town maintenance worker? Elise stepped forward, releasing Daniel's hand only to show her own strength. Her voice was firm, resonant, and completely unlike the shy whispers Daniel had grown used to. Be silent, Father. He saved me. Not your security. Not your money. He saved my life, and I will not allow you to disrespect him. Daniel had never seen her so fierce, so courageous. The act of defiance was stunning. Then came the second professional twist. Elise turned her back on her father and addressed the bewildered lawyer. She spoke with the authority of someone who had just found her voice after years of silence. Draw up the immediate transfer papers, Mr. Thompson. I want full, independent control of my voting shares and liquid assets, effective immediately. And furthermore, I am appointing Daniel Cole as my personal advisor and the sole point of contact for my internal communications. He will be my firewall. Her father stared, aghast, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. Are you mad, Elise? You ran away, lived on the street, and now you hand over power to a stranger? Elise met his furious gaze without flinching. No, father, I'm not mad. I'm finally sane. I only trust the man who gave me a sandwich when I had nothing. I only trust the man who saw me when I was invisible. I refuse to be controlled by power-hungry people anymore. Daniel stood rigid, completely overwhelmed by the sheer, overwhelming scale of the event. The battle for the Sterling Group heir was being waged around him, and he was inexplicably at the center of it. Elise turned to him one last time, taking his hand firmly in hers in front of her entire family, the lawyers, and the assembled staff. It was a public declaration of allegiance. You are the only one who saw me when the entire world turned its back, she stated, and you are the only one I will ever trust. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Elise was immediately sequestered in the private wing, placed under the care of private doctors and psychological therapists within the estate. But her commitment remained. She refused to speak to the family, the corporate team, or even the doctors unless Daniel and Lily were present. The head physician, a renowned trauma specialist, pulled Daniel aside one afternoon in the expansive library. She trusts you more than anyone, Mr. Cole. She sees you as her protector, her safe space. She believes you are her only emotional anchor right now. Daniel felt an immense pressure. His life had been simple, fixing appliances and raising his daughter. Now he was the crucial link to a traumatized billionaire heiress. He had only intended to be kind. He never wanted to be a most important person. He was just the repairman. I'm not a professional, Daniel admitted, feeling hopelessly out of place in the lavish room. The doctor shook his head. No, you're something better. You're proof that human decency exists, which she was convinced had been completely engineered out of her life. Lily, as usual, was the key to healing. She spent her afternoons with Elise, coloring and building towers. One day she presented Elise with a bright, colorful picture. It was titled, Miss Angel with Wings and a Shield. The shield was Daniel. Elise looked at the drawing, and the true, non-corporate facade finally crumbled. She wept openly, pulling Lily into a tight, desperate embrace. You make me brave, little one, she whispered. Daniel's new role solidified. He was her quiet life coach, helping her reclaim the simple freedoms that had been stolen. He taught her small acts of personal freedom, how to select and buy groceries herself at a normal supermarket, a tiny act that symbolized autonomy, how to navigate a busy street and use an elevator alone without the fear of being trapped or monitored, and most importantly, how to confidently say no to people, even her father's lawyers, who tried to hurt or control her. Elise made tangible, profound progress every day. Her self-esteem slowly returned, piece by piece, fueled by Daniel's unwavering respect and lack of expectation. Elise's father, the formidable Mr. Sterling, observed the transformation from a distance. He watched his daughter laugh, a sound he hadn't heard in months, as she practiced making her own coffee, a simple act he had once forbidden. He watched the simple maintenance man give her more courage and healing than all his corporate power and wealth combined. One evening, he approached Daniel in the hallway, humbled and aged by the trauma of his own daughter's near loss. My daughter is smiling again after 3 months of hell. Because of you, Mr. Cole. I owe you everything. I apologize for my earlier prejudice. Daniel looked at the man who commanded billions, who was now just a frightened father. He just shrugged. I didn't do anything magical, sir. I was just kind. It's what everyone deserves. Elise appeared behind Daniel, placing a small, grateful hand on his back. He did what money can't buy, Father. He gave me back my worth. He gave me back my voice. That night, alone in the privacy of her apartment wing, Elise finally confessed the full depth of her despair. Her voice was low and filled with painful truth. Daniel, if you hadn't stopped and sheltered me from the rain that day, if you hadn't offered that first sandwich, I was truly ready to give up. I was going to find a way to end the pain. I would have died of despair. Daniel's chest tightened. He reached out and gently squeezed her hand. You are not alone anymore, Elise. You never will be. She looked at him then, her eyes searching his, not for love, not for money, but for absolute safety and certainty. It was the most important question she had ever asked, a test of trust that went deeper than any contract. "I need to know, Daniel," she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I trust you with my life. Can I trust you with my heart?" After 2 months of intense healing therapy, Elise stepped back into the world not just as a survivor, but as a force. She was no longer the fragile woman Daniel found at the bus stop. She was a poised, strong heiress, ready to take full, absolute control of the Sterling Group. But she never fully let go of her anchor. During every high-stakes board meeting, every tense shareholder negotiation, Daniel sat by her side, not speaking, but simply present, her silent moral compass, her reminder of true north. He was her spiritual advisor, a title that meant nothing on paper, but everything to her survival and her new integrity. The company began to change. Under Elise's direction and Daniel's quiet influence, the culture shifted from exploitation to ethics. She used her power not to dominate, but to heal, implementing the protections she had been denied for all employees. One sunny afternoon, Lily burst into Elise's immaculate corner office, holding a small, vibrant bouquet of dandelions and wildflowers, her own interpretation of true treasure. "Miss Angel," Lily exclaimed, running up to her, "these are our family flowers. They grew by Daddy's shop." Elise laughed, a full, ringing sound of genuine joy that echoed through the otherwise sterile corporate office. She swept Lily up into her arms, embracing the simple, honest beauty the girl represented. Daniel watched them, a deep, unfamiliar warmth blooming in his chest. His heart, once walled off by grief and duty, felt complete for the first time since his wife passed. Elise gently put Lily down. She walked over to Daniel, her eyes shining with certainty and a future that felt impossibly bright. She was no longer asking for help. She was offering a partnership. "You helped me live again, Daniel. You showed me the outside world wasn't completely cruel. You are my home, not this mansion. I want you to stay." Daniel was overwhelmed. He had spent his life fighting for survival, not accepting luxury. "Elise, you belong to this massive world. I'm just a repairman, a single father. My world is too small for yours." Elise placed both hands on his chest, right over his heart. Her voice was low, firm, and irrevocably determined. "The size of the world doesn't matter. I belong where I am loved, and where I am safe. That is right here." Lily wrapped her arms around both of their legs, beaming. "Yay! Then Daddy and Miss Angel are my family now. We can go to the bus stop and help people together." Elise lowered her head, resting it on Daniel's shoulder, tears streaming down her face, tears of true, pure happiness and relief. Mr. Sterling appeared at the doorway, having witnessed the exchange. He stood quietly for a moment, then spoke, his voice surprisingly soft. "Daniel," he said, finally dropping the formality, "my family doesn't need a powerful man. It needs a good man. If you can make my daughter this happy, then I am happy too. Welcome." Daniel finally let go of his past fears and took Elise's hands in his. Lily stood in the safe, warm space between them. The final scene, the trio walked out of the enormous mansion in the late afternoon glow. They were not defined by the guards, the wealth, or the corporate titles. They were a quiet, powerful unit, a family born not from inherited assets or calculated ambition, but from a simple act of profound kindness on a rainy bus stop bench, which ultimately saved 3 shattered lives. If you believe stories like this, stories of quiet courage, undeniable truth, and profound human change, deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Single Dad Stories. Your kindness matters.